to the TokyoBill Weekly, stories from Japan, told from Japan. This week, why people are lining up at midnight for a new novel in a country that is running out of bookstores. Just after midnight on the morning of July 3rd, a crowd gathered outside the Kinokuniya bookstore in Tokyo's Shinjuku district and did something that, in an era of same-day digital downloads and next-morning delivery, looked almost deliberately old-fashioned. They waited, they counted down, and when the clock struck 12, they collected their pre-purchased copies of Haruki Murakami's new novel, The Tale of Kaho, and went home to read. More than 60 people turned out for the launch event at Shinjuku alone. The historic Sanseido bookstore in Jimbocho, Tokyo's legendary book district, a neighborhood that has been selling books since the Meiji era, hosted an overnight lock-in event for dedicated readers. One fan told reporters he had taken the following day off work specifically so he could read without interruption. "I took the day off tomorrow," he said, "so I want to read as much as I can." It is, by any measure, a lovely scene, and it sits in almost perfect contrast to a set of statistics published just 3 weeks earlier that tell a rather different story about Japan and its relationship with books. As of the end of March 2026, Japan had 9,993 bookstores. That number matters for one specific reason. It is the first time since records began in 1994 that the count has fallen below 10,000. In fiscal year 2025 alone, 499 bookstores closed. 102 new ones opened. The net loss was nearly 400 stores in a single year. Japan's bookstore network peaked in 1998 when 24,237 stores operated across the country. The figure today, 9,993, represents just over 40% of that peak. In less than 3 decades, Japan has lost nearly 15,000 bookstores. To understand what that means in practice, you have to think about what a Japanese bookstore traditionally was. Not simply a place to buy books, though it was that, but a neighborhood institution. To local Honya-san, the bookshop around the corner, was where you picked up your weekly manga magazine, browsed the new releases, bought the textbooks your children needed, and occasionally found something you didn't know you were looking for on a shelf you'd walked past a dozen times. It was part of the rhythm of the neighborhood in the way a pharmacy or a post office was. Functional, yes, but also ambient, part of what the place felt like. According to a survey by the Japan Publishing Industry Foundation for Culture, municipalities with no bookstore at all now account for just over 29% of Japan's total. 510 cities, towns, and villages where there is simply nowhere to walk in and buy a book. That figure was around 26% just a year ago. It is moving in one direction only. The economics behind this are not complicated, even if the implications are. Sales of books and magazines in Japan peaked in 1996, bringing in roughly 2.5 trillion yen between them. By 2025, combined sales had fallen to around 965 billion yen, below 1 trillion for the first time since 1975, and less than 40% of the peak figure. Magazine sales have been hit hardest. Magazines were once the larger of the two markets. They were overtaken by books in 2016, and the decline has not stopped since. The weekly and monthly magazines that filled the racks of every convenience store and bookshop across Japan, driving foot traffic, sustaining distribution networks, keeping the whole system viable, have lost most of their audience to the internet and smartphones. The convenience store connection is worth dwelling on because it reveals how integrated the book and magazine distribution system once was with ordinary daily life. Japan's convenience stores, the 7-Elevens, Lawsons, and Family Marts that are genuinely everywhere, used to carry substantial magazine sections, As those sections shrank and eventually disappeared from many locations, the distribution infrastructure that connected publishers to small local bookstores was undermined. The system had been built on volume. Without the volume, the margins for small neighborhood stores became impossible. What is emerging in the gap is a patchwork of responses, some more promising than others. Lawson has opened 32 convenience stores with attached bookshops, a format called Machi no Honya-san, or the town bookstore, carrying around 8,000 books and magazines alongside the standard convenience store lineup. Japan Post has announced it will begin trial sales of children's books at some post office counters from July 22nd. A bookstore in Kumamoto has launched an online book selection service, where staff choose books worth around 10,000 yen based on a detailed profile of each customer's preferences and reading history. A bespoke curation service that can reach customers anywhere in the country, not just those who live nearby. Some stores have gone further in their efforts to make browsing feel like an event in itself. One bookshop sells bags of books with the titles deliberately hidden. Only a memorable passage from the work is printed on the wrapping. You choose based on a sentence, not a cover. It is the kind of idea that only works in a physical space, and it is the kind of idea that suggests some booksellers have understood something important. What a bookstore can offer that a screen cannot is not just access to books, but the experience of encountering one unexpectedly. That insight points toward what may be the most durable argument for the physical bookstore in the digital age. And it was made, of all places, in a comment from a reader at the Murakami launch. She said she reads mainly on digital devices, but tries to visit bookstores when she can, because the recommendation algorithms online tend to narrow over time, showing her more of what she already knows she likes. A bookstore, by contrast, is full of things she didn't know she wanted. The serendipity of the shelf. Haruki Murakami is, of course, a special case, the kind of author whose new book draws midnight crowds regardless of the broader publishing climate. The Tale of Kaho, his first novel in 3 years, and the first in his career to feature a sole female protagonist, is a 352-page novel that grew from a short story he read aloud at Waseda University in 2024. It is, by all early accounts, characteristically Murakami. A young woman, strange things happening around her, the familiar texture of the uncanny pressing in at the edges of ordinary life. Fans who had been following the 4 chapters as they appeared in the literary magazine Shinsho came to the launch knowing the broad shape of the story and wanting the full version anyway. That is a particular kind of literary loyalty, the kind that travels to a bookstore at midnight rather than clicking a link. But Murakami himself has spoken about the role of bookstores in terms that go beyond his own sales. In various interviews over the years, he has described the physical act of browsing, walking through a shop, picking up something unexpected, sitting with it for a moment, as essential to the way books find their readers. The algorithm gives you what you ask for. The bookshelf gives you what you didn't know you needed. Japan is not alone in facing this. Bookstores have been closing across the developed world for 2 decades. The same forces operating everywhere. Online retail, digital reading, the collapse of the magazine market. But Japan's situation has a particular character, because Japan once had more bookstores per capita than almost any comparable country. And because the neighborhood bookshop occupied a cultural role here that was unusually central. Losing it is not simply a retail story. It is a story about what a community looks like when one of its habitual gathering points quietly disappears. The midnight crowd at Kinokuniya in Shinjuku, and the lock-in at Sanseido in Jimbocho, and the fan who took the day off work to read. These are not evidence that the crisis has been resolved. They are evidence that the appetite for books, and for the experience of getting them, has not gone away. What is going away is the infrastructure that once made that experience available to everyone, in every neighborhood, as a matter of ordinary daily life. 9,993 bookstores. That is what Japan has left. Last year it was over 10,000. The year before that, more. The direction is not a mystery. The question is what gets built in the space where the bookstore used to be, and whether whatever replaces it can do what a good bookshop does, which is put the right book in front of someone who didn't know they were looking for it. That's the Tokyo Bill Weekly for July 4th, 2026. I've been, and remain, Tokyo Bill. Thank you for listening, and take care.